There are forces of good and forces of evil at work in the world today. What are these forces? Who is responsible for the good? And who is responsible for the evil? Richard Shoff talks about current events which are rarely discussed by the mainstream media, events that affect us all. This program seeks to identify, to inform, and to equip the believer for what's ahead. Welcome to What in the World is Going On?
Now let's talk about the slaughter up in Pittsburgh and our pro-Israeli president. Jerry Falwell Jr. sure likes him. He said on Newsmax TV, there's not any Semitic bones in Trump's body. Falwell noted ripping the irresponsible politicization of the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting and liberal activism by the media before the midterms. Jerry Falwell Jr. told Newsmax TV that President Donald Trump is, quote, no anti-Semite. He's been the most pro-Israel president in Americans' history, a quote from Dr. Falwell, who's president of Liberty University, the largest Christian university in the U.S. There's not an anti-Semitic bone in President Trump's body, and anybody who knows anything about him knows that. It's just more fake news. A direct quote from Jerry Falwell Jr. Falwell ripped the media's immediate politicization of the shooting and political bomb scare before the midterms. He pointed out it was disrespectful to the victims and their families, proving that they're just an arm of the Democratic Party. If it wasn't so irresponsible, it would almost be funny to watch the mainstream media destroy this last bit of credibility that they had by doing anything as stupid as trying to blame the president right before the midterms for the acts just of a deranged, civil, evil person. The same thing with those fake bombs. I think they're completely self-destructing. We shouldn't be trying to politicize something like this. We ought to be mourning for the victims and their families. We should be praying for the families, noted Dr. Falwell. Well, Trump promises destruction for those seeking the destruction of the Jews. I was personally stunned watching the live coverage of President Trump's campaign rally in Murfreesboro, Illinois. He said something that may be the strongest statement ever delivered by an American president about the Jewish people. Trump's enemies expected him to offer some sort of boilerplate denunciation of anti-Semitism, owing to the awful slaughter in Pittsburgh. I'm sure there were many preparing to dismiss whatever he said, and sure enough, they did. Wow. But he said something, folks, that really electrified me, going far beyond any ritual condemnation, to make what struck me as a declaration that the United States is the guarantor of the survival of the Jewish people. And folks, according to my Bible, that's pretty heavy. The Jews have endured terrible persecution, and you know that over the years, we've all read about it. We've studied our Bibles and seen it there. We've studied it. They've gone through a lot, and those seeking their destruction now, folks, we can seek the destruction of those who would destroy the Israelis. Every Jewish Democrat should look at this moment and ponder whether the party of Keith Ellison really deserves their support. This was no mere boilerplate. It was outright love and a desire to protect. A thoughtful experience for us. Think of this, folks. Imagine the result of any Democrat speaking at the Democrat National Convention, making this promise. What would the response be? You think there'd have been any boos? Seriously? This is a strange message, and it's directed not only to the neo-Nazis. It applies to the Middle East. It's a promise to destroy those who seek to destroy Judaism, and by implication, Israel. Destruction is not mere condemnation and goes far beyond punishment. Folks, as you well know, it is biblical in scope. History, ancient and modern, is littered with nations and empires that tried to destroy the Jews and which themselves passed from existence, from Egypt and Babylon to Hitler's Germany. Well, Trump has just promised to add America's might to the continuation of this pattern, almost as God's willing instrument in protecting his chosen people. Folks, this is not a small thing. If anyone can point a similar promise from an American president, I'd appreciate it if you'd send it to me. There's hope for Tuesday's election. I didn't think Trump would win the presidency. The polls didn't show it. I lacked faith. But God was in the election 2 years ago. We've got the same God today. And folks, I really feel deep within my soul that that statement and that pledge by our president, you know, the Lord heard it. The Lord heard it, folks. Mark Sergini points out that Donald Trump might be America's first Jewish president. The American people should be proud of their president. In the wake of the tragic shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, President Trump spoke out in the most forceful condemnation of anti-Semitism ever uttered by an American president. While former President Barack Obama nonsensically chose to blame the lawfully possessed firearm used in the crime, as if the gun fired itself, Trump put the blame squarely where it belongs, on the evil ideology and the man himself who pulled the trigger of that gun while shouting, quote, "Kill all the Jews." In a speech in Murfreesboro, Illinois, Trump declared, "We must stand with our Jewish brothers and sisters to defeat anti-Semitism, vanquish the forces of hate." Through the centuries, the Jews have endured terrible persecution. Those seeking the Jewish people's destruction will now face their own destruction. We will back them. That from President Donald Trump. The president's doing much more than offering his thoughts and prayers to the families whose loved ones were murdered by this evil anti-Semite. The president has vowed to go on the offensive to seek the destruction of those forces of hate who would persecute our Jewish friends, neighbors, and fellow countrymen. The president has vowed to use the full force and power of the U.S. Department of Justice to bring the assassinator to justice. The very same day that he committed those horrible crimes, U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions filed a 29-count complaint against him in federal court. Now that's quick and decisive action, isn't it? The charges include hate crimes and 11 counts of obstruction of exercise of religious beliefs resulting in death. The president is doing exactly what he said he would do. He is seeking the destruction of the man who destroyed the lives of 11 innocent Jewish Americans. He's simply exercising their religious right. And folks, these charges carry the death penalty. The president believes that to protect the American people from the followers of Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, or any of the many anti-Semitic terrorist groups who would come here to harm and kill Americans, particularly Jewish Americans, we need a thorough vetting process and a border wall, and we need to build that wall. We need to build it now. The president is leading the rhetorical fight against anti-Semitism, and some of the leaders of the Democrat Party would do well to follow his lead. You know, it was painful to watch former President Bill Clinton recently share the stage, a handshake and a laugh, with the anti-Semite Louis Farrakhan, a man who's called Judaism a gutter religion, and who just declared just months before, quote, "Satanic Jews have infected the whole world with poison and deceit." You know, Clinton should have rebuked him instead of warmly embracing him. Former President Barack Obama, former Nation of Islam member and current Democratic National Committee member Representative Keith Ellison of Minnesota and Representative Maxine Waters of California have all shamefully accepted Farrakhan's political and financial support. Recently, a secret photo of a smiling Obama and Farrakhan coming out of a Congressional Black Caucus meeting in our U.S. Capitol building taken when Obama was a newly elected senator was released. These Democrat leaders should not be smiling and socializing with this heinous anti-Semite. And then there's Trump. He's not only strongly condemning anti-Semitism, but bringing the full power and prestige of the U.S. government to bear upon those who would seek the destruction of the Jewish people. Trump is proving once again that, unlike his critics who pay lip service to religious tolerance while embracing deplorable anti-Semites like Louis Farrakhan, Trump is confronting and attempting to destroy this evil and perverse ideology. And for that, the American people should laud and not condemn him. Because of his unprecedented words and actions, confronting this ancient scourge of anti-Semitism, perhaps Donald Trump will go down in history as America's first president. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Now I want to go over to our southern borders. Let's take a look at that, and let's see what's going on down there. You know, folks, if you get arrested for hunting or fishing without a license, but not for entering and remaining in the country illegally, you might live in a nation that was founded by geniuses, but's run by idiots. As a student, if you have to get your parents' permission, to go on a field trip or take an aspirin in school, but not to get an abortion, you might live in a nation that was founded by geniuses, but is run by idiots. If you've got to show your identification to board an airplane, cash a check, buy liquor, or check a book out for a library book, run a video, but you don't have to show it to vote for the ones that run our government, you might live in a nation that was founded by geniuses, but it's run by idiots. Folks, stop and think about it. Is this really consistent? If being stripped of your constitutional right to defend yourself makes you more safe according to the government, you might live in that nation that was founded by geniuses but run by idiots. So think before you vote in these upcoming elections. Most of the idiots running this country say one thing and do the exact opposite. They think the people won't pay any attention. But let's see if I got something right. If you cross the North Korean border illegally, you get 12 years hard labor. If you cross the Iranian border illegally, you're detained indefinitely. If you cross the Afghan border illegally, you get shot. If you cross the Saudi Arabian border illegally, you're jailed. If you cross the Chinese border illegally, you may never be heard from again. If you cross the Venezuelan border illegally, you'll be branded as a spy and your fate will be sealed. And if you cross the Cuban border illegally, you're going to be thrown into prison. It'll be a political prison, and you can rot there. But listen, if you cross the U.S. border illegally, what do you get? Well, a job, a driver's license, Social Security card, welfare, food stamps, credit cards. Your rent will be subsidized. You get a loan to buy a house, free education, free health care. You get your own lobbyist in Washington. There'll be billions of dollars worth of public language printed in your own language. You're going to have the right to carry your former country's flag while you protest that you don't get enough respect. And even some instances, folks, you'll get to vote. Just wanted to make sure I had a firm grasp on this situation. Fellow Americans, it's time we wake up. It's time we take control of our own destiny. Well, I see just lately, just a couple days ago, where Trump is pressuring Mexico to stop the migrant caravans. Last Wednesday, President Trump kept up the pressure on Mexico to halt groups of migrants heading to the American border as the U.S. enters the final stretch of campaigning before key midterm elections. Trump has sought to put immigration front and center ahead of this coming week's hotly contested vote. He's ordered thousands of troops to the southern border and threatening to end automatic citizenship for U.S.-born children of immigrants. The administration has sent mixed signals out over the Mexican efforts, praising it for helping or trying to help while pushing it to do more. Trump had previously thanked Mexico for deploying anti-riot forces to the country's southern border, and White House spokeswoman Sarah Sanders said on Fox News Wednesday that, quote, Mexico has stepped up in an unprecedented way, end quote. The group of migrants that Trump has sought to cast as a threat to the United States are still in southern Mexico, hundreds of miles from the U.S. border. A first caravan, which has dwindled and now numbers at some 4,000 people, this according to an aid group called Pueblos Sin Fronteras, arrived last Tuesday in the southern city of Mexico, where a smaller group of 2,000 people managed to cross the river separating Mexico from Guatemala the day before. Trump has announced he's sending up to 15,000 soldiers to shore up the U.S.-Mexico border, but they'll likely be limited to support activities as they're legally barred from conducting law enforcement operations in the U.S. In another move likely to appeal to his right-wing base ahead of the upcoming vote, Trump has said he plans to scrap by executive order a constitutional guarantee to citizenship for persons born on U.S. soil, with few exceptions. And I see, folks, that this caravan of migrants are different. They're more violent than the previous migrant groups. This according to a U.S. military source. They warn, to hear the press and its narratives allies tell it, the Honduras migrant caravan is little more than thousands of mothers and toddlers spontaneously fleeing violence in their home countries. The flight's a little different from that in previous caravans. Especially right now, specifically, signs are mounting that far from the exodus being a Madonna and child in flip-flops narrative, the military-aged, unemployed males dominating the wave of caravans are far more violent than has been reported by our very liberal press. That's not a scare story from some right-wing militia group, but the actual view of the U.S. military, whose now 7,000-plus troops have been dispatched to meet the caravans and keep them from storming the U.S. border and entering the U.S. illegally, as they've already done into Mexico. Asked if the dispatch was all a border stunt by a reporter, Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis icily replied, quote, "We don't do stunts in this department. Thank you." End quote. According to Military Times Publicity, the top commander in charge of Homeland Defense will only say the military does not yet have a full understanding of what threats will surface from the caravan. However, some violent acts have taken place within the caravan, and the way it has forced its way through the border between Guatemala and Mexico has raised concerns that the makeup of the population traveling differs from the past. We're working closely with the Customs and Border Patrol to understand the makeup of the nature of this caravan. That's a quote from United States Northern Command Chief Air Force General Terrence O'Shaughnessy. He said, and I quote, "This caravan is different than what we've seen in the past," end quote. That would certainly go for not just the first caravan headed our way, but the chain reaction for the second, third, and more caravans following. The second migrant caravan, believed to be armed with bombs and guns, crossed into Mexico this past Monday, despite a huge police force in Mexico. Hundreds of migrants following in the footsteps of the first caravan leading to the U.S. border crossed the river from Guatemala. The second group of the Guatemalan frontier has been more unruly than the first that's already crossed. Mexican authorities said migrants attacked its agents with rocks, glass bottles, and fireworks when they broke through a gate on the Mexican end, but were pushed back, and some allegedly carried guns and fire bombs. Meanwhile, back in the U.S., the U.S. Border Patrol has warned Texas landowners at the international line to prepare for armed conflict from the caravan. The U.S. Border Patrol this week reportedly told Texas landowners along the U.S.-Mexico border to prepare for a possible influx of armed citizens on their property as the migrant caravan moves closer to the U.S. It's astonishing, this departure that we see from the picture the mainstream press has been painting for us about the supposedly harmlessness of the migrant caravans. And it's completely in line with the warnings President Trump has made about the possibility of criminals within the caravan ranks. If that's not reason to distrust this nation's mainline press narrative reporting, I really wonder what is. Trump is sending up to 15,000 troops, backing with 150 miles of razor wire, Black Hawks, drones, and C-130s in the air. He's sending them to the Mexican border to deter caravan from ever arising. President Trump has called for the troops to deter what he calls an invasion. The president claimed the caravan contained many gang members and some very bad people. His quote, 3 helicopter companies and 3 engineer battalions are there to participate. Enhanced optics, fencing, hardening of the border, he declares. The final caravan is making its way through Mexico, though the numbers have dropped to about 4,000 from the first. Folks, this is all official. It's datelined recently, October 29th. It's happening now. Trump said we'll reinforce along priority points of entry so as to enhance Border Patrol's ability to harden and secure the border. A quote from our military last Monday. The forces are just the start of the operation, he said. We're bringing 3 helicopter companies in. They have enhanced optics and sensors that will allow them to operate at night and provide assistance to bring our Border Patrol personnel exactly what is needed, regardless of the conditions. The Pentagon says the added forces will be able to spot, identify groups, and rapidly deploy personnel as needed. The dramatic dispatch of U.S. forces to the border comes just days before the off-year election, with Democrat critics arguing Trump is using the perceived threat of the caravan to motivate his political base. According to the Pentagon forces, the wall will first be built in southern Texas, Arizona, and then California. Folks, it is time to actively get behind the construction of that wall. Trump has spoke directly to the mostly Honduran members of the caravan in a recent tweet where he said, quote, "Please go back. You will not be admitted into the United States unless you go through the legal process. This is an invasion of our country, and our military is waiting for you." An end quote from our president. Among those ordered to the border will be military, police, engineers, and Marines. The report noted that the contingent would exceed the U.S. forces currently in Syria and Iraq and equal half of the U.S. deployment in Afghanistan. I think our president is serious. And are you ready for this? They're not even ordered over the border yet, but these members of the caravan are already suing from their rights into the United States. A dozen immigrants traveling by foot from Honduras to the U.S. to seek asylum filed a class action lawsuit against President Trump, against the Department of Homeland Security and others, claiming a violation of their due process under the Fifth Amendment. And these people are not even in our country yet. The Fifth Amendment states, quote, "No person shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor to be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law." Well, 12 Honduran nationals, including 6 children, are listed as plaintiffs in the lawsuit. The lawsuit, which was filed Thursday in the U.S. District Court in Washington, said it is widely known that Guatemala, Hondurans, and El Salvadorans are undergoing a well-documented human rights crisis. The lawsuit also claims that the plaintiff's right to the Administrative Procedure Act and the Declaratory Judgment Act were being infringed upon. The lawsuit points to Trump's claim that he will prevent the caravan from entering the U.S. It claims that the president cannot stop asylum seekers by employing the military if the people have a fair claim. The suit criticized the president's alleged attempt at stoking fear and hysteria by claiming that guerrillas and criminals and gang members have joined the caravan. The suit cited a Trump interview with Fox News' Laura Ingraham, where the president laid out plans to build tent cities to house migrants. The suit questioned the functionality of such a project and asked if these living quarters would qualify under the Floors Agreement of '97. The agreement protects asylum seekers' rights and limits how long minors can be held. Trump announced in a lengthy speech at the White House last Thursday afternoon that in response to what he called the crisis on our southern border and a surge of fraudulent asylum claims in recent years, his administration will soon require asylum seekers to, quote, "lawfully present themselves at a port of entry." Asylum claims made by migrants caught crossing the border illegally would seemingly be summarily denied under Trump's proposal. And this, folks, again, they haven't even got up on the border yet. They're already suing us. What in the world do you think would happen if they were actually here? And our Border Patrol chief has been begging for more help before the campaign hits. Over 12,000 illegals were caught in the last 3 weeks in the Rio Grande Valley. Folks, they are asking for our help. We need the wall built. Don't have time to get in this program this week, but I've got a question here. Who's paying for it all? Where do you think the funding comes from? We've got some pictures of many of the migrants carrying cell phones. I wonder whose telecommunication system they're using. Wonder who pays the phone bill. Wonder what the conversation is. Who do you think's behind it all? Let's take a look at it in future programs. Don't forget to vote, folks. Your vote counts. Who we send to Washington will determine the amount of freedom we have. God bless until next week.